This is Kurt Franklin. Yeah, that's how I want to start it, actually.
I think we should do, hello, I'm Mr. Reagan. I'll go, and I'm Nancy.
Mr. Reagan.
Kurt's my best buddy and my writing partner. He flew in from Hawaii, and I decided to put him on the show. So Kurt has just started his own show called Total Recast. Why don't you tell him what the show's about?
Well, the show is basically me taking movies that have had questionable casting choices, like Highlander, they got a French guy to play a Scottish guy, and they got a Scottish guy to play an Egyptian. So even though I love that movie, it's sort of like a weird casting choice. So it's just basically me making fun of movies that I love and ones that I don't like so much. And that's basically it. Just recasting.
Just talking about movies.
Recasting movies with more appropriate actors or actors I would have liked to see in those roles. And it's focused around comedy.
Well, it's funny.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was appropriate that we talked about the movie business a little bit. We're here in Hollywood. We're both aspiring writers. Both, I would say, total failures. That's I think that's an appropriate. Yeah.
Total's a strong word, but it's total
more
failures.
Or less failures. Yeah. It's a difficult place, Hollywood.
Not total in the sense where we write really good things, but in the sense where no one gives a damn.
Yeah, nobody cares about us at all. All of you guys probably know, just from reading newspapers and stuff, the thinking of the whole, left-wing SJW approach to movie making. And so we're thinking about that, and we thought a good topic would be to discuss the way Hollywood portrays the straight white male.
Mr. Reagan.
The way Hollywood portrays the straight white male.
That's right.
That's my impression of Mr. Reagan.
Do you know what that voice is that I do?
Understated Rod Serling?
No, everybody thinks it's Rod Serling. I'm actually doing Jeremy Clarkson from Top Gear.
But with it turned up to the max.
Oh, but what?
The greatest car in the world.
But you're not putting on the British accent. You just sort of like have the cadence.
Yeah, it's the American version of Jeremy Clarkson. Yeah, I learned to do my hosting from Top Gear. Well, it's now the Grand Tour. Hopefully that comes out soon. I'm looking forward to that. They keep going away for these long stretches. Like Top Gear used to be like...
That's on Amazon Prime, isn't it?
Yeah, Amazon Prime. It's very irritating. I love it. Well, whatever. So in my perspective, and you can tell me if you think differently, they seem to portray straight white men in two distinctly different ways in Hollywood. One, they are the epic hero, sort of the traditional idea of the great, awesome guy, which I think there's a reason that they do that. And then if he's not the most awesome guy in the film, he's not the lead, then he's like a completely useless idiot or a total evil a-hole.
Right.
And that's it. So he's completely negative or he's completely positive. And I think that there is really only one reason why straight white men tend to be cast as the hero very often. And I think that that's because there's a market for it. For whatever reason, men, women, black, white, Asian, Hispanic, everybody kind of either expects or wants to see straight white men as leads. For whatever reason, these are the actors that tend to bring in the money, and so they get to be the action heroes and the romantic leads and this kind of thing.
Straight men, I mean, like, these are straight. These are actors we're talking about here. I mean, I think Scarlett Johansson said it best when she described all male actors as being a rather delicate bunch.
Delicate.
I love her. She always says messed up stuff about male actors being pussies. It's hilarious.
Does she?
It's like, oh, you're surrounded by all these men. She's like, man, these are actors. What are you talking about?
I have new respect for Scarlett Johansson.
I'm the toughest guy in the Avengers.
I don't know if I heard her say that. I love that so much.
Yeah, she's awesome.
So aside from the leading man role, for which there is a huge market for straight white men, these guys, I guess guys like me, tend to be cast as either completely useless, completely hapless losers, or pure evil, right? So it's you do occasionally get other races as villains in movies today, but most of the time, I think you tend to find it's white men.
Well, the responsibility that is felt on the part of the filmmaker is to include positive representations of minorities in their film,
right.
Which is why you tend to have
this is the SJW.
Which is why you tend to have things like the strong, independent woman character, the token black guy, usually like the partner or the friend or somebody. Right. It's just like this black guy here is just as good as the hero, but we're not going to pay attention to him. We're just going to see. Okay, moving on. That's why
there's a sense of responsibility.
Yes,
we've got to push this agenda because America's
and films
racist
as well.
Stupid.
When you have that concern, which I actually agree with, like like True Lies would be a good example. True Lies, you got a big German guy going around shooting Arab guys. But then he's got the little buddy character in the van with Tom Arnold there,
who
has
Arab,
his hero moment.
or an Indian or something.
And he's playing, he looks like the bad guys, but he's not a bad guy. Right. So all these guys aren't bad. See?
Not all these
but that
guys
didn't
are
work because they still were just like, well, Arnold's running around blowing up Muslims. What a terrible movie.
That guy was actually really funny.
He's funny. He was good.
Yeah.
He did a few other things. He had a bit of a career there in the 90s. He was in Congo, which is a terrible but awesome movie.
I think that the 90s and the 80s,
much like Schwarzenegger's acting, terrible and awesome. Anyway, go on.
I think in the 90s and the 80s they kind of had the balance right. They didn't want to overtly say these guys are all bad, because that felt irresponsible. So they would kind of have this sort of. But then there was like this idea of tokenism. Oh, now you're using this guy as like the token black guy.
Richard Donner was doing Lethal Weapon, the first Lethal Weapon there, and I guess it came out in '87. But he's talking with this famous casting agent, who I can't remember her name because there's no such thing as a famous casting agent, but she was a very well-known one, and she suggested for the character of Murtaugh, Danny Glover. And Richard Donner's response was, well, yeah, but he's a black guy. And she says, like, well, so? So Donner's like, huh. So he thinks about it and thinks about Danny Glover playing that part of, and this was like, this is before the Cosby Show? Richard Donner's.
What was it, like 83?
This, Lethal Weapon 1 was 87. Came out
Was
in
it that late?
87. Yeah, it's later than you think.
Okay, so it was definitely after Cosby Show.
Edging towards the 80s. But, because Richard Donner didn't immediately think of a black guy in the role. Why would he? He's a white guy. That doesn't make him a racist. It just doesn't mean. It just means he wasn't thinking like in a broad spectrum. But the casting agent was, and she was like, "I think Danny Glover would be perfect," which of course he was.
Yeah.
Especially as like a counterpoint to Mel Gibson. He's taller. He's stuffier.
Well, that is
thing.
exactly how casting should be done, right? You should just find the best person for the part, and it doesn't really matter. If you're going to cast an actor for a part that's a particular way, you just find somebody who's like that. This whole kind of identity politics where they're just shoving people into parts because they feel like that person needs to be represented in that way in society because society is so ignorant. It's not particularly effective because you're not always getting the best person. It's really I think offensive to America. Like, it's disrespectful to America. So now it's like if you're a straight white guy, you're relegated to these two kinds of roles. You're either lucky enough to be the action hero or the leading man, or if you're not one of those two things, you have to be a beta male with like a beard and like a kind of a beer belly and kind of like a what do you call it, like a marshmallowy gooey doofus, or you have to be like super evil. You really have only those kind of two options. You do occasionally get the everyman role, but I think kind of like the smart cool guy who is a little bit better than everybody else, that's almost always relegated to the role of a woman, almost always a woman, or some kind of ethnic minority or something like that. There's this kind of push and I think that's because Hollywood perceives straight white men as unsympathetic, right? So you're either extremely competent and a good person, which makes you a hero, or you're extremely competent and you're evil, which makes you a villain, or you're incompetent and it's funny because straight white men have all this privilege. So in the face of that, being useless makes you super useless. It's like hilarious.
So to put it in late 70s terms, you're Superman.
Excuse me.
You're Lex Luthor. Or you're Otis.
Otis, take the gentleman's cape. I don't think he wants me to, Mr. Luthor.
Those are your choices as a white man.
Perfect. And then there's this big controversy about whitewashing, and that's when you take a traditionally Asian character or a black character or something like this, and you make them white, or you take a and that's it. Actually, that's it. That's what it is.
You make a character that was a minority, you make them white in the film.
Yeah, and they do this in the reverse a lot too. They'll take a lot of white characters and they'll make them black or Hispanic or Asian or whatever, or they'll take a man and they'll make them a woman, or they'll take a straight person and they'll make them gay. They call
that updating the material.
Yeah. They call that
That's good. That's good.
Yeah, so that's good. Yeah, that's good. And then if you made a character white, it's bad. So my take on this is that for minor characters, it's actually fine. Like, you should be able to make them white, you should be able to make them black, whatever, it doesn't matter to me. For major, iconic, legendary characters, you're stealing from the culture. Because the reason that Superman is because of all the things that make him Superman. It's not just because he has superpowers. It's because of his parents. It's because he grew up in Kansas. It's because, he had that sort of like all-American 50s childhood. I mean, I think it was the 1940s that the comic was originally around. But that whole golden age of comics, that's the history of Superman. And if you change that, if you make him a different race, or you make him a different religion, or you make him a woman, it completely changes everything about him based on that one thing. And that, because we're not talking about a very small thing. Yes, and I think aesthetics are important too. It's important to have a particular look for a particular character if that character is an icon of culture.
Well, when you're dealing with cultural icons, you're also dealing with something that's persisted and been part of the human consciousness for a long period of time.
And there's a reason it got to be an icon. And it's all the elements that make it that. It's not just the superpowers. And you can't just change it drastically.
Yeah. And you can't say that like someone who was black or was Asian or Hispanic can't appreciate or identify with the character of Superman because he's not. I mean, that's something that's been going on in the culture for a long time. We're just sort of like,
There's tons of white kids who love to watch like martial arts films, like Bruce Lee. There's tons of white kids that love Bruce Lee. There's tons of black kids. Actually, in black culture, Bruce
that
Lee
was huge,
is like a big deal. What, they can't relate to him because he's Asian?
In the 70s and 80s, there was like, that the black guys started dressing up like they were from China and making kung fu movies. I mean, it's like, that kind of stuff crosses those sort of boundaries.
So now, in my experience, and I've worked a lot in sort of like the low-end Hollywood stuff. Like, I actually just got a bit part in a TV show, which I can't talk about because it's all top secret, but it's going to be on Apple TV, which apparently Apple's pumping a lot of money into original content, which is kind of cool. So
awesome
a lot more
projects. For providers,
yeah, a lot more
get work.
Projects getting made, stuff like that. But yeah, that was quite cool. I got 2 days of acting, and I said a few lines, which is kind of nice. I may or may not be working at NASA. I think that's about as much as I can say. Every single person in that room, almost every single person, was a white male. But this was set in NASA in the 1960s. So, what are you gonna do? But I typically find that is the exception, not the rule. Typically, in sort of like the low-level acting jobs, your bit parts, commercials especially, they're very reluctant to hire
motorcycle riders for this very reason. Because if they do, they'll be trying to record something, and you'll get this crap.
They're very reluctant to hire white males. They almost exclusively hire like black guys or ethnically ambiguous people. This guy, Asians, Hispanic.
You were thinking, what the hell is that guy?
Women. Well, okay, so I had an agent for a while. She's actually a friend of mine, real nice lady. And I was sitting in her office one day, and she was like, "Do you know any over 40 black women?" And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because I can get them a job like that." They're in huge demand at the time, and I think they kind of still are. Like if you're a black girl, it's much easier for you to get work in Hollywood than if you're a white girl. If you're a black guy, it's much easier.
I smell a Tootsie remake, except you're not going to be a woman; you're going to be a black woman.
That would never, Tootsie would never work today. The trans community would freak out. I'm thinking, it doesn't matter anyway.
You'd have to hire a woman to play a man playing a woman.
Yeah, that would be how you do
it. And every time you got deeper in the dream, things got a little bit slower, and you were falling towards off the bridge into the water. Yeah.
Until you found the top spinning, and then
Tootsie by Christopher Nolan.
Oh my god.
And he's riding, just like whacking the edges.
My gardener is not a fan of this show, apparently. So my agent was like, if you're black or you're Asian or you're Hispanic, it's much, much easier for me to get roles for people. Smaller roles, commercials, stuff like that. And so everybody always gets up in arms about these, leads. The lead is always white, or the lead is this, or the lead is that. It's very hard, I think, for Hollywood to inject their sort of SJW agenda in a lead role. They still do it, for sure, but it goes against the market a lot of the time. And that's much harder for them to do, because if they want to make money, then they have to do what the market demands. But they've got this conflict, right? So I want to put an Asian woman here, but the market demands Mark Wahlberg come in and do it. So they end up having to hire basically who's going to make them the most money, because they have a responsibility to everybody who's investing in the film.
Once someone is an established draw.
When somebody is established,
they're more likely to.
Right, but that's something that the market demands. It's not like it's hard for Hollywood to manufacture stars. I think
Just like Tom Cruise playing Jack Reacher, which is something I'm going to address in my show Total Recast. Jack Reacher on paper, as described in the novels by I think his name is
he's a lumberjack essentially. It's like the
Lee
big
something.
dude.
He's a big dude. He's like 6'5", barrel chested, like buff, like 250-pound guy who people will look at and be like, damn, that's a big dude. That's a scary looking dude. Tom Cruise, not that size guy, but he's Tom Cruise. If Tom Cruise wants to star in the movie, the producers, everybody looks at it and goes like,
yep,
Tom Cruise wants to star in our movie? I don't care what the movie is. Hire freaking Tom Cruise.
Was this supposed to be a small Asian woman? We'll hire
because
Tom
now
Cruise,
because now we've got a $100 million budget baseline probably. They expect it now to make $500 million. Now it's a bigger movie by virtue of his inclusion, and maybe not the. I think he's great in those movies, but I mean, like, that's why that happens.
And you guys choose the stars by going to the movies with the actors you like. So you make stars by how well movies do, and movies do well based on how many tickets people buy.
It's perfect representation of the free market system.
It's a free market system. I mean, it's not a perfect representation because you can still say, well, I don't care. I want to put this person in my movie, and I don't care if it's going to damage the bottom line. So people do try to inject their politics into it. They do try to kind of like, well, I prefer, if they have several options. Let's say they've got Tom Cruise versus Will Smith versus...
But the success of those films will dictate.
The success of those films definitely does dictate to some extent, but the smaller roles they can manipulate. They can make it whatever they want. They can basically force feed you whatever they want to do in terms of the rest of the casting of the movie. Now, I think that's a mistake because I think every aspect of the film, every small detail, needs to be done in such a way that it's going to make the best film possible. That's how I think of filmmaking because I take it all very seriously. But a lot of these guys, their politics are more important. They don't have an outlet like I do to express themselves politically. So this is their outlet, right? Casting a small bit part for this black kid because they don't think enough black kids have roles or something like that.
And actually, in the Daniel Craig James Bond films, they have a black Moneypenny, and oddly enough,
the James Bond.
Those her part as Moneypenny is bigger in every one of those movies than ever was in any other movie.
And she can like shoot guns and
crap.
They
cast a black woman as Moneypenny and they give her a much larger role.
Our biggest problem, I don't mind her being black so much. We've discussed this. Both of our problem with the new Moneypenny is she's too sexy. She's too sexy. Moneypenny's supposed to be kind of like, she's supposed to be hot, I think, but sort of in a sort of girl next door cute way, like a cottage English girl.
And she should have never been a field agent. The idea that she could have been a field agent.
Secretary.
She could have been a field agent, but you know what? She decided she wanted to be a secretary. Like, give me a...
Yeah, no. Moneypenny. I know some girls who could play Moneypenny brilliantly, and they're absolutely charming. They're girls you'd want to date. They're nice little English girls. They had this controversy with Doctor Strange. Whitewashing controversy because they're like, the old wise guru is supposed to be an old Asian dude, and they cast whatever it is,
Tibetan.
Tibetan.
They're supposed to be Tibetan, and supposedly the reason they didn't do that, and they cast a woman who was Celtic, I believe, fine actress. Can't remember her name right now.
Tilda
Swinton. Yeah, I was thinking Tilton, but that's not right.
Tilton.
Yes. Tilda Swinton.
It's a kind of
playing a.
Old
Irish Celtic, playing Celtic, and people were like cried whitewashing over that. But the whole thing behind that is they want Chinese money. So the Chinese
they don't like Tibet.
It's no secret that they don't like Tibet. So if they lose out on all that sweet yen or whatever they got out there,
and they also feel like they're balancing it. They're taking away an Asian part, but they're including a female part. So they're taking away one SJW.
But of course, that wasn't good enough.
Victim of society, and putting in another oppressed victim of society.
And it's interesting too because you had a lot of people took issue with Iron Fist, the Netflix show Iron Fist, who is sort of in that same group of street level heroes as like Daredevil and Luke Cage and those guys, and they were crying whitewashing for Iron Fist, but Iron Fist was conceived as a redheaded white guy, but then of course and that's how he was done. But I can see that like there might be an outcry over something like, okay, the best. It's sort of like Tom Cruise in The Last Samurai. It's just like the best guy of all these guys is the white guy that came over and learned to do stuff better than them. That's sort of like the idea behind it. But I mean, if you're writing for an American audience, it makes sense to have an American star.
Yeah, if I were writing for a Chinese audience, I would make a Chinese guy come to America and do crap better than all the Americans. Because that would be like fantasy fulfillment for them, right? It's a fantasy fulfillment thing, right? But it's not necessarily racial. It could be cultural. It could be just geographical. You got the language barrier. If you can come over to any foreign land and be better than everybody else, it's kind of a cool story.
Right.
It doesn't really matter who the hero is or what the culture is.
And they've done that in other and other realms as well with white people. They did like this. There's this movie with John Wayne where I think it's Brannigan, where he goes over to England, and it's all about the American in England. Yeah. So it's not necessarily a skin color thing, an ethnicity thing. It's a cultural thing.
Yeah, Fish Out of Water story.
Fish Out of Water story. Crocodile Dundee. Excellent movie.
The guy who is the
He doesn't have to be Aboriginal, because essentially he is Aboriginal, raised by Aborigines. He's almost Tarzan. But the whole idea is he's from the Australian outback, goes to New York, and that's a huge difference in culture.
Well, Roger Moore played like the British cousin of Maverick. In the original series of Maverick.
No, he didn't.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
No one realized that Chris is actually 85 years old. He was also on Maverick. How much does that Robert Colbert guy look like Christian Bale? That's freaky.
Brent Maverick, yeah. That's funny.
Oh, that's the other guy.
Yeah.
Because
he doesn't look that much like him.
There was such a demand for the Maverick show. They had two actors.
No, that wasn't it. What it was is that they took so long to record each episode.
Oh, so they alternated week to week?
Yeah, so they had two different crews. Yeah. And then they would alternate week to week.
What a concept.
It was a cool show.
This week on MacGyver, the other MacGyver. It's just like,
we should do that.
He also learned all the same stuff as MacGyver.
So I think what we're trying to say here is that most of what society, the SJWs, Hollywood always blows up about, no black people won the Oscars this year or whatever. A lot of that's kind of manufactured hysteria, right? It's manufactured controversies. They're not really that big of a deal. I would say that Hollywood is, I wouldn't say it's devoid of racism. I'm sure there's some racists that I haven't met out here, but for the most part, they go well above and beyond, out of their way to try to be inclusive of race, to the point where they tend to be a little bit exclusive of straight white men. They tend to treat, I think, straight white men in the writing poorly, often, unless it's the lead, which is, again, driven by the market. Or they tend to just exclude straight white men as much as possible from roles generally. They just don't like to see them in movies or commercials or TV shows. And a lot of people will say, well, no, I see white men all the time in TV shows, movies, and commercials. But I do think it's a smaller percentage than what you would expect to find given the percentage of the population.
Exactly.
Generally.
We haven't discussed that. If you take the percentage of the population into account, then it's...
Well, the thing about TV and movies is they'll take statistics and they'll try to incorporate them into their projects. So they'll say, okay, well, there's 12% black people in the country. There's this many percent Hispanics. There's this many percent Asians. Let's make sure we have an even distribution in the project. Well, depending on where you are in the country, there might be 1% black people and no percent anybody else other than white people. Or you might have, 90% black people or something like that. So, nobody complains that in like an all-black comedy, there's no white people. Nobody complains about that because that's realistic, right? You go into a black neighborhood, it's you may not see a white person for several blocks.
They don't want to get shot.
I did not say that. But in any sort of mainstream sort of like, white culture film or American culture film, you've got to include as many races as possible. You've got to be as inclusive as possible. I think it's not necessary. This idea that, I need to see somebody that looks like me on the screen. It's like there are people who look like you on the screen. All right, you've got tons of people. You've got Will Smith. You've got The Rock. You've got a lot of different, I think, successful actors who are great actor. Ving Rhames is great. Morgan Freeman. I don't know, Chris Rock. You can go on and on and on. There's tons
Chris Rock is a brilliant stand-up, but he's a terrible actor. So
I like Chris Rock. I would put him in movies. I would put him.
He was great in Superman, actually, with the bad outfit line.
that is Nobody's gonna get that reference. I'm not putting
bad outfit.
Hey, Jim! Whoa! Excuse me. That's a bad outfit.
Well, we have to remember, too, that people in Hollywood don't think the way normal people think.
No.
They have their own perception of what reality is and how other people regard things. So they are going to care more about presenting their perspective.
And wanting to change the world to make us all less racist. At the end of the day, I don't think it's the most harmful thing in the world in terms of for society, but I do think that it's quite negative for up and coming sort of like straight white actors who maybe can't get a job because the industry wants to cast somebody that pushes their agenda, wants to put a woman in the cast or something. But I think it's always going to be like this. I don't think it's going to change. I think that's just part of the game, right? It's a crappy system out here. There is actually a much worse problem in Hollywood, which is nepotism. So, if you're friends with somebody or you're their relative or you're their cousin, it's much easier for you to get a script read or if you get an audition or something like that than if you don't know somebody.
Oh, I thought you were talking about having sex with corpses. What am I thinking of?
Necrophilia.
Oh, yeah. I love that.
That's great. That's a problem in Hollywood, too.
No back talk. It's awesome.
I think that's all. I think that's everything.
I think so. I was gonna mention how maybe it might be just more interesting, the cast, instead of, say, a straight white man, cast a woman or cast a black guy or something.
Yeah, casting against type is often just a more entertaining way of casting. So, at the end of the day, I don't think it's actually a huge deal. I know a lot of people kind of complain. I certainly complain a lot when they blow it up as like, oh, they didn't, they cast a white person in this role, or they cast a black person in this role. I don't think it's a huge deal unless you're dealing with icons, like cultural icons. I don't think they should make James Bond black. I don't think they should make Superman black, anything like that. Sure. I did kind of like they were going to cast Childish Gambino as Spider-Man. I kind of like that idea, just because I like him, just because I like that actor.
I think what you touched on is important too, because I don't like the idea of trying to hijack an audience,
or hijack part of the culture.
Yeah, well, like with Star Wars, they want to push an SJW agenda, so they take Star Wars. Because lots and lots of people are going to see Star Wars. Yeah. If they made their own thing, their own fantasy, their own epic, their own science fiction movie, and made it all SJW-y, it wouldn't be that built-in audience, for one thing. And then once early word got out, people wouldn't see it anyway.
Yeah, it's the same as hijacking a plane and saying, we have these demands. Yeah. Right? You're saying, like, we're going to kill all the people on this plane unless you give us what we want. It's kind of like that. I mean, like, you're terrorizing people. You're creating you're doing a terrible, terrible thing, to push your agenda, to get the things that you want across. It's,
Yes. So if you want to push your agenda, don't do it
cultural
with
terrorism,
beloved cultural icons.
Yeah, don't do it with beloved cultural icons.
Because then you're just messing with people and negatively impacting or potentially negatively impacting an audience that doesn't deserve that. They just want to have a good time. So,
anyway, that's it. I think
that's it.
Yeah. So watch Kurt's show. I'm going to put a link to that here somewhere. I'm going to put a link to that in the description. I'm also going to have a link at the end here. So go ahead and click on that. It's going to be a great show. I'm going to be in the first episode, I hope.
We're going to record it right now.
We're going to record it right now.
So stay tuned for us talking about the new James Bond film that's coming up. Not the next Daniel Craig one, but what's going to happen after Daniel Craig vacates the part. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about his films. We're going to talk about where we'd like to see that franchise go and who might be the next James Bond.
That's it for us. If you liked my show, give me all your money on Patreon, because I'm poor. Don't forget to hit the like button. If you want to see more shows like this, please subscribe. And if you hate us, well, then what?
Go f*** yourself.
Yeah. I'm going to end on that. Good night. Good night.
Mr. President, in talking about the continuing recession tonight, you have blamed mistakes of the past, and you have blamed the Congress. Does any of the blame belong to you?
Yes, because for many years I was a Democrat.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so. Now,